Look at these two gorgeous jack-o'-lanterns. Hello, creative people. My name is Catherine, and this is A Motley Art. And this is Scrapbook Sunday, where I'm going to show you a 2-page 6x6 layout that I created with the Boo Crew collection by Close to My Heart. If you'd like more information about the collection, check out my description below. I've done a couple other videos with this particular collection, so I'll put a playlist up top here so you can go and see those other videos if that interests you. I hope you will watch this whole video to get some inspiration for Halloween layouts or other types of layouts that you could use this similar layout for. Let me see if I can say layout one more time. We'll see. So with this is not a typical layout. I don't know if I'm going to be able to get away from that word today, so I hope you're okay with that in this video, because I'm actually going to make some flaps. And what I did was make some 3 1/4 by 4 1/4 flaps out of orange. I believe it's called nectarine for Close to My Heart. And then I cut a 3 1/2 by 4 1/2 black piece that I'm going to put behind my flap that I created. So oftentimes in scrapbooking, you don't have flaps on your scrapbook pages. You just put the image straight down. But I wanted these layouts that I'm doing with this particular collection to kind of feel like a little mini album. This way I would get a little bit more space to decorate and be creative on top of. And you also could put more than just one image per page, because that is one of the drawbacks of doing 6x6, of course, is that you can't get as many images or photos onto your scrapbook page as you would a 12x12 page. So this increases it, where I could do 2, or I could do some journaling, maybe do 3 and then some journaling, but it's all kind of hidden. So that's just nice if sometimes you don't necessarily want all your pictures just right out in the open. It can be kind of fun to have some interaction and to have to do something to see the images. Also, if you're showing this to somebody and maybe there's one image you don't want them to see, you just kind of flip past it real quickly. But I just thought it would be fun. I thought it would give it more of a mini album feel and something different. Plus, I wanted the real estate. I wanted to be able to still put more items onto my page in a slightly different way than if I had put the full 3 1/4 by 4 1/4 mat. I do like to use that mat size because that's for a 3x4 picture, and I just think it's nice size. It fills up the page really nicely, so you're going to get a good amount of your image shown, but it's not so big that it's taking up all of the space. Because if you try to put a 4x6 on a 6x6, you only end up having 2 inches to really play with. It takes up most of the space. And I don't want that. Then it kind of, I don't know, when you do that, it starts to look a lot like a pocket album, where you have the sleeves and you just kind of slid your pictures into them. So I still want this to feel like a more traditional scrapbooking layout, but I don't want it to, but I still want to have an image that's large enough that you're going to be able to see, your picture well. So I'm making these jack-o'-lanterns that I cut out from a Cricut image that I found on the Cricut Access. And originally I was just going to put the darker pink behind the lighter pink that I cut out. But then I saw, when I laid one of them down with the darker pink, a little bit of that orange come through, and I just thought it looked really kind of interesting. I thought it gave the jack-o'-lanterns some personality, kind of made their eyes seem a little bit more alive. As you can see there, if you kind of look real quickly, the difference between just the solid and then adding that little bit of orange, it just kind of seems to give them a little bit of something, a little bit more personality. So I did that for all 3 of them. And as you can see, I kind of had to finagle that first one because I didn't think about it right away. And I even sat there and thought about it for a few minutes once I had started doing that last one to be like, is this really what I want to do? But yeah, I just liked it a lot. So I went with it, and I just kind of had to play with the first one until I could get the orange into the spot that I wanted. So of course this would have been easier if I had thought about it ahead of time. But that's kind of what's fun with different cutouts that you do on the Cricut, is then you can embellish them on your page however you want. Now I did also do a solid back because I knew I kind of wanted to sandwich in, like I knew I was going to put something behind the face, and I wanted to sandwich that in between the top and the bottom. That way it would just stay really nice and secure. And I thought it would also kind of make my elements, give my elements a little bit more lift, you know, make them a little bit more dimensional, which I liked, without putting a ton of dimension onto the page. That way it still is really easy to put them next to each other. They're not going to interfere with each other. Because sometimes if you pop things up too much, then they kind of like, they'll hook onto each other, and you can kind of feel it. Now, if you were putting this into some page protectors, you wouldn't have to worry about that. But I don't plan on putting this into an album with page protectors, so I just wanted to make sure that they weren't going to latch onto each other and then kind of pull every time you open and close the album. So it takes me a few minutes to get that done. And while I was kind of fiddling with that, I was thinking about the stems. So this Cricut cut, which if you go to Cricut Access and you just type in jack-o'-lantern, you'd be able to find it. It does have some stems, and I was trying to decide on how I was going to incorporate the stems, or if I even wanted to. But then when I sat there and I looked at them, I was like, oh yeah, they need the stems. The thing is I only cut the stem out one time. I did not cut those out multiple times. So I wasn't sure how I was going to handle that. But in a little bit, when I get to that part, you're going to see that I decided to just go with the one layer, and I kind of like it. It gives it that extra dimension, kind of gives you some depth, so that the stem is not as close to you as the jack-o'-lanterns themselves are. Now I knew I didn't want the jack-o'-lanterns to be right on top of that orange, that I wanted to do something else. So first though, I needed to add my tabs onto these flaps. This will just, I think, one, it's a visual indicator that, you know, you're supposed to do something here, and two, it'll just make it easier to open up those flaps. So I like to do that. A lot of times with my flaps is try to make some visual to let you know that you need to do something there. So then I was trying to audition a couple of different papers, trying to decide what I thought I wanted to do there, partially because I knew I had a sentiment that I wanted to put on to one side, and I thought, you know, a solid would make that a lot easier. But I ended up not liking that darker pink with the jack-o'-lanterns because it's in the jack-o'-lanterns. It's in their mouth and their eyes, and so it just didn't make them pop as much as I wanted. So I went with the black and white star paper, and I just felt like that actually gave you more of a punch. And also I think it's kind of fun because I'm going to make basically like a little pumpkin patch as if it's at night, right? Pumpkin patch at night. You could kind of think of it that way. So I'm going to do all of my stamping, and I am going to do kind of a bunch of stamping, but the first thing I decided was my sentiment. I still wanted that same sentiment. So I took out my Intense Black and I stamped first the Too Cute to Spook. I am using the Intense Black instead of the Basic Black by Close to My Heart because the next things that I'm going to be stamping, I'm going to watercolor, and the Intense Black is not going to move with the watercolor, where the Basic Black will bleed because it is a dye ink, and the Intensive black is not a dye ink. So that's kind of the difference between those two. And if you do watercoloring, then you really want to get the intense black. Both of the blacks are beautiful. They are both, I think, make a really nice solid black line. But the intense black, if you do intend to do some watercoloring, that would be the one you want if you don't want to have multiple blacks, because it's not going to move on you. So I stamped out a whole bunch of those candy corns, and in a few minutes we're going to see how I watercolored them. But before I do that, I decided that there was a pumpkin I wanted to go ahead and stamp out a few times as well. And I'm doing 2 stamps. I'm doing the first and then the second, because I thought I would like to have a little bit of a relief. I wanted them to have kind of a little bit of a different look. And I'm using Papaya, which is kind of like a peachy pink, almost to orange, but not really orange. So when you put it next to orange, it definitely doesn't look orange at all. When you don't have it next to an orange, it almost kind of looks like it could be an orange. So I thought it would be a nice contrast. I thought it would go well with the other pinks that I'm using. And I just wanted to have some solid and then ones that were not quite as solid. Now I decided I wanted to use my Distress ink markers to color in, because I really wanted 2 different colored pinks, and I had those in the Distress Mark inkers. The one is Spun Sugar, and the other one is Worn Lipstick. So I just put that onto an acrylic block, and now I'm just picking it up with some water. I do find that the Distress markers don't move super well, so you do need like a fairly good amount of water if you want the colors to be not super saturated. And I didn't want these all to be really, really dark. And I wanted some, to be maybe a little bit darker than others, just so you'd get kind of that nice contrast. So that's all of them. They are done. And then I decided I was going to just use my thin cut to cut out those pumpkins. But before I did, I wondered if I could get a little watercoloring done on them. Now, I will say, for the cardstock that I'm using, I think I waited too long to do this step. I think if you really wanted to make the solid pumpkins look a little bit like a watercolor, then you need to do that as soon as you stamp them, and I waited a little too long. So it moved a little bit, but it's really hard to see, and it wasn't 100% the look that I wanted, but they still looked really nice, so I'm going to use them anyways, especially because these are not going to be focal elements. They are going to be behind my focal elements, so I really wasn't going to stress out about that. If you know that your element isn't going to be in the forefront, don't spend tons of time on it. Nobody's going to see it. So you always want to spend the most time on the things that are up front, and then the other things that are kind of more in the background, of course, make them look nice, but don't waste too much time on it. So now I have to cut out all of these candy corns. I stamped a whole heck of a bunch because I wasn't sure how much I needed. So I just wanted to make sure that I had plenty on hand. And so it's going to take me a few minutes, and I'm not going to bore you with watching me cut all of those out. But there they are. There's my little pile of candy corn, along with my pile of pumpkins and my sentiment. So I pulled out the stems here. As you can see, these are for the jack-o'-lanterns. And I just kind of was putting it together. Again, I was still trying to decide if I was going to need to try to pop them up somehow. But I decided no, I liked the way it looked. But I did think that it just needed a little bit of color to it on the edges. I just thought it looked very flat, and putting a little color on the edges of the stem would bring it out a little bit more, which it really did. And I used the papaya for that as well, seeing that it was a pink, and I didn't want something too drastic, right? Too contrasting. So these worked really well together, and I'm going to like it so much that I'm going to actually put a little bit on the jack-o'-lanterns as well once I've stared at it for a few minutes. Because sometimes that's the way I am. I just don't see things right away. I don't ink a lot. I find for me, a lot of times I rather things not be inked on the edges, because to me that always gives it a little bit of a distressed look, and that's not always what I'm going for. In fact, a lot of times that's not what I'm going for. I've seen so many beautiful things that people do, making them look distressed, making items look distressed. If that is your art style, it's a wonderful art style, but it's not mine. I like whimsical, and I find that one of the things that helps with whimsical is actually having a little bit of white on things, having things be a little bit more cut and dry and not faded out actually gives them kind of a whimsy look. So I'm just touching up a few things, though. I did think that the pink candy corn would look better with some black on the outside. And then I went ahead and I touched up my sentiment a little bit as well, because when I was stamping my sentiment, I didn't quite get all of the P or the O's, and the micron pens work so well with it. It just blends right into that black. They just match really, really well. And the thing too is, I guess when I was cutting out, I do find sometimes when you have a black outline that you've stamped down and you go to cut that out, sometimes it can be really hard to make sure you're perfect with your cutting. So running a black marker like that on the outside, it just kind of hides any imperfections. If you didn't quite get close enough to the stamp mark, it just kind of hides that. And that way too, you don't risk of taking too much of your stamp mark off, because I find with fussy cutting, that can be one of the things that trips me up a little bit. If I'm trying to cut like right close to the outline, sometimes I almost start going a little too far in, because I'm trying, I'm trying to make sure that I'm not leaving any white. But it's really better to leave just a little bit of white and then color it in with your black later than to go too far in and take off too much. I'm also going to put some black on the black and white cardstock here that I have, because I just felt that it looked nicer that way. Just gave it more of a finished look. So it's hard for me to say when I do that and when I don't do that, because it really is just, do I think it will look better with the white on the outside line, or do I think it will look better with the black? And in this case, I just thought it would look better with the black, and I liked the way it was. So that's what I did. And now I'm putting stuff together. So I'm putting that down first, and then I'm putting my flaps down where I want them. I didn't put them right same. I put one up a little bit higher than the other one. I just thought that would look a little bit nicer visually. And then I'm gonna start building my little pumpkin patch there on top. So when I saw this gingham like orange paper, the first thing that came to me, well, the two things that came to me was pumpkin and tablecloth. So that's where the candy corn kind of comes in with this whole thing, is that I thought it would be cute to have a layout with that tablecloth looking paper and then strew a whole bunch of candy corn on it, like you just spilled a bunch of candy corn down. But then I also, like I said, pumpkin also came to me, so I really wanted to do something with the pumpkins as well. And so that's kind of how this layout came together in my mind. And I really am glad that I decided to add those extra just solid pumpkins. I think it just helps give a little bit more interest to this overall layout, and kind of gives you that feeling of looking at a bunch of pumpkins in a pumpkin patch, which is something that I love about fall, is the pumpkin patches. We used to go, when I was younger, every year to go pick our pumpkin from one particular pumpkin patch. And so it's just a really happy memory for me. And I just wanted to kind of be able to have that on a layout that would just make me smile. And this layout definitely makes me smile. And I love the way those jack-o'-lanterns came together. I just think they're so cute. And I like that they're different shapes. They're not all the same shape of the pumpkin, they're different shapes, just like pumpkins grow in different shapes. So I really liked that. So I did put a foam dot on that one pumpkin there in the back so that the top of it kind of comes out towards you a little bit more. I just thought that gave a little bit more interest to this particular layout. And as I was putting these down, I was really conscious of where I was putting those background pumpkins, and I really tried to make sure that I had them in a way that you'd be able to see them. I didn't want to cover them completely up because, again, you know, you spend time on something, you don't want to completely lose it in your layout by covering it up. So once I got all of that fixed and down, then I'm gonna, as you can see, I'm gonna kind of strew out my candy corn. I have a really hard time with making things look random. If I just try to pick stuff up and put it down random, it's not gonna come out random. It's gonna look symmetrical. I just have a really hard time with that. But I really wanted that look for this page. So I find what's easy for me is to kind of drop the things down and then glue them down. That way I kind of just have an idea, oh, yep, this is the way I wanted it to look. And then it's a little bit easier for me to create that again. And I wanted this to come down the page in a diagonal on both the pages. I really wanted, that way it will help your eye come across the page. I just think that's really fun. And it's just a good way of composing your elements. So it's going to take me a couple of minutes to get these all glued down. I do have a couple that are hanging off the paper, and I will cut those flush in a little bit. But there again, it just helps with your composition. Sometimes when you have things hanging off your page, it just allows your mind to kind of see that continuation. Like your mind will fill things in for you. And so I went ahead and did that with this one so that you would kind of get that visual indicator that, oh yeah, it's like these are going, like this is a really big table and they're still going. So many candy corn, so many pink candy corn everywhere. So I also, when I put my flaps down, I did try to make sure that I didn't glue right to the edges. That way I'd be able to kind of sneak some things underneath of the edges. I'm not always great about that, and so sometimes I have a hard time trying to pick it back up later. But this time I was able to get it done and it worked, and so I was able to get some of those candy corns underneath my flaps as well. And I just think that also just really helped to make this very cohesive, to make this layout cohesive. Even though after I got all these done, I still was thinking, I don't know, something just didn't seem 100% right to me. You know, I was making sure that everything was nicely tacked down. But then I realized, you know, wouldn't it be nice to have a couple of the candy corns in with the pumpkin patch? Now, in reality, these candy corns would be huge. I mean, the biggest candy corns you've ever seen. But I just tucked them in a little bit here and there, and I think it just helps to kind of connect the two different images together. And then the last thing I wanted to do was to add a little bit more sparkle. So I went ahead and put some glitter gems by Close to My Heart with the candy corns as well. So it'd give it a little bit of sparkle when you're looking at it. So here's where I go ahead and cut those ones that are hanging off. And I really only did it to a couple of them. I didn't do a whole lot of that, but it's enough to give you that nice continuation feel. I really love how this layout came out. Here's the flaps. Now, while you always want to make sure that you don't put anything on the top that comes over your flap, or else it won't open as nicely. Sometimes it still happens, so that's why I like to check them. And I was able to trim that little bit off, and now it opens really nicely. I hope you found some inspiration by watching my video. If you haven't subscribed to my channel, please do, and have a creative day.